Welcome to CHFS 2106, the coolest class online. Um, I don't know, that's not the greatest intro. I should maybe do that again, but that's like my fifth try. Um, Anyways, welcome. I hope you're doing well, and we're gonna get into chapter one. That's really looking at this idea of what is developmental psychology, right, and how is it unique in within the broader world of psychology, right? And developmental psychology, like kind of quickly stated, is like when you add the variable of age, right? So like psychology is obviously like the study of the mind and all these things that like are associated with that you've been probably studying in other courses. But in this course, we really want to look at how age plays a role in that, right? Like how age shapes this whole process, like how what you worry about or what you're um, concerned with or aroused by or scared of or um, interested in, or what your preferences are for things, and how all those things change with age and change with like, and not just that, like how like since something like your identity of who you are is different when you're like, say my 1-year-old baby or my like 6-year-old who's going to grade one, or like me as a 41-year-old, or like you as a student, or like my parents as seniors. It's like, what role does age play in our psychological experience of life, right? So we're going to be, first of all, talking in this lecture about a little bit of an overview of what developmental psych is and who some of the key theorists are going to be that we're going to return to. And then in the chapter 2, we're going to get into the biological underpinnings of all this. And then the last lecture will be, sorry, then the last lecture. This is late at night. It's like almost midnight on Sunday. I just wanted to get the first slide done and kind of get started and do like kind of an audio test and stuff, because I have Monday basically the whole day booked, and except that my daughter will be here because the daycare person she goes to is a little under the weather for maybe one more day. So, anyways, but my wife will be here too, so I'll be getting it all recorded tomorrow, and hopefully get it to you like tomorrow night sometime. And so anyways, so what I was going to say before is that chapter 1 is basically like an intro to developmental psych. Chapter 2 is the biological beginnings chapter, where it really looks at from conception to birth, and especially in relation to brain development. And then after that, we start going through the life cycle, right? Like starting at infancy and then going into childhood and then adolescence. And then the second part of the course after the new year, like after Christmas, is going to pick up in the social part of adolescence. If you've seen the course syllabus overview video, you know what I'm talking about. Alright, I'll catch you on the next slide. As we start to look at developmental psych, I got just some interesting kind of first points for us. And again, this first sentence doesn't sound like super groundbreaking, but it's actually pretty deep, this idea that we develop in essentially the same way, but very differently. And that's like the easiest way to describe that would be looking at something like puberty. Like obviously puberty, if you were to just look at your most immediate friend group, it hit your friend group, even people that were similar to you, very differently than it maybe affected you. And that's just one aspect of it, right? And it's like, so the idea is that there's a commonality to the user manual of what is a human brain, but it manifests and expresses differently. And similar idea with genetics, and we'll get into this. When the baby's conceived, we see this explosion of brain cells, and in next week's presentation I'll get a little bit more specific on the difference between just like cells and brain cells and nerve cells and neurons and all this kind of early stages after conception, because basically what you're seeing in the images above my head there are like the emerging brainstem. And at week 3 there, you're just calling it a neural tube. It's not the brainstem yet. And then as so this course we're going to be looking at conception, but mainly from the perspective of brain development, like what stages the brain develops through. By 4 weeks, the brain is at a stage where we would say that it's there. Okay, so That's where I was kind of saying at 3 weeks we'd probably call it still just a neural tube. So it's basically like you can quite see why it's called like a tube that's filled with stuff, and what it's filled with is the neurons or the cells that are going to be the brain cells. And we're going to talk about this because this is like the most interesting thing about your brain in a lot of ways, but you'll hear me say that a lot of times. There's a lot of things that are absolutely mind-blowing about your brain that we've named, and then we're like, okay, next thing. It's like, oh, that's just specialization. What do you mean specialization? So you mean that these cells that were originally one cell keep dividing into different ones, and then some of those different ones do different things. Some of them become your heart, some of them become your lungs, some of them become your brain. It's so, and then even, so that's specialization in a broad sense. And then delineation and specialization is also used as a word to mean within the brain. Like within the brain, like what some of those cells are going to be visual processing information cells, and some of them are going to be related to memory, and some of them are going to be, the prefrontal cortex or the motor cortex. The prefrontal cortex basically coming out of the motor cortex, and it's like all this stuff is like very interesting. Oh man, I was doing a pretty good rant. I'm 3 minutes in and I just had a little bit of a hiccup burp, but I'm going to leave it in because life's not perfect. I'm not perfect. I'll try to do my best. I'm a 40-year-old with a kid at home, so there might be a little bit of background noise, but I think we'll be all right. My wife's home today. It's been a bit weird first 2 weeks. I'll just be a bit personal for a sec because it's like start of school back, and so my youngest kid just turned 1 in July, and it's tough. Like, it's tough having Charlotte go to a daycare, but the person that she's going to, this Katrina, we really like, and she's just been a bit under the weather last week and today, so it's just been a bit of a weird start to the year. I don't know why I'm all of a sudden talking about this. I think I was saying something about the recording environment, but anyways, yeah. So if you hear a little bit of baby noise, it's my lovely daughter, who's awesome in almost every scenario except when I'm trying to record audio. Okay, by the time of birth, yeah, there's been 1 billion nerve cells created. And again, like, it's like, how do you know this? And it's, well, we're going to talk about in this course how we get some of these like super huge numbers, and how it is largely speculative, but it's a very educated guess. There's reasons to think it's roughly that amount. And that's you. And it's really like, I know you all know this. Obviously, you all know this. You've all taken health class. You all know that the sperm and the egg, that the sperm fertilizes the egg, and that's what becomes the baby, and then that egg divides into more and more and more, and then. But it's pretty wild to think that that basically just happens until there's you, and that's. See, and this is where you get into the tricky philosophical question, right? Like, it almost seems designed, but what do you mean by designed? Who designed what? So you see how very quickly you can get into this like discussion around evolution or religion, and it's like, or a God that created an evolving universe. It could be any of those things, and it's this interesting conversation, right? Because you get to this point, and even Darwin struggled with this. You might think about Darwin as against the church. Darwin, if you read Origin of Species, which I'd recommend reading, you can probably get Origin of Species on Amazon for like $5. One of the most important books ever written, easily. And in Origin of Species, Darwin spends a long time talking about the human eyeball, and that the human eyeball is so advanced that it made him lose sleep at night, second guessing his evolution theory. Now think about that for a sec. He thought that the human eye, your eye, which is advanced, it's one of the most advanced things that we know about in the universe. Think about that 1/3 of your brain energy goes to processing visual information that your eye is bringing in. Your eye is amazing at knowing what to focus on and what not to. And when I'm saying your eye, I'm meaning more like your visual system, right? Because your eye is the sensory organ of it, right? So like, just to go a little bit further, like your eye, and then you have your optic nerve, which goes to your brain. And if you hadn't, I have, because I'll tell you the story at some point, but when I was younger, I had a tumor that's all better now, but I also almost lost sight in my left side because I had tumor that was pushing on my optic nerve. This is a bit intense of a story for slide 2, but whatever. And it was making me lose vision. When I was coming back from Thailand, I couldn't see out of my one eye, which was very stressful. And when I got home, the doctor realized that that's what was the problem. So anyways, vision. So I've like, ever since that, I've been obsessed with vision, because I almost lost my vision, and I had to really train back my vision. And I do Chinese martial arts, kung fu, and there's this one move in Tai Chi where you basically come across, it's called like sweeping hands. I'm not doing my head right, because you're supposed to follow your hand, right? And so like you like basically, the reason I'm showing this is, it makes sense in a sec. So you basically come this way, this is a block at the end, but like as this turns, boom, you're supposed to kind of follow with your eyes and then look. And it's like, that sounds like nothing, but after my surgery, I had really bad double vision to the point of needing to sit down. And double vision is like basically like feeling like car sick in a really intense way. And so it took me about 8 months to train that back, and I trained it back by watching my fingers, because my eye wouldn't do that. My eye would jump, right? Like my eye would go like from here to here to here. It wouldn't do a smooth line. I had to train that. Oh, makes me physically feel sick even thinking about it, because it was so much nausea I had to train through. But now I'm talking to my beautiful students on the other in the other side of this beautiful province that I get to live in. You know, and I get to explain to you my favorite subject. It's like life. That was in 2007, so it's weird. It's like literally 15 years later. It's like I thought my life was over. You know, I thought like I was like an academic and an athlete. I was like pretty good at martial arts back then. Like did a lot of like demonstrations, all that kind of stuff, and then I had this thing happen, which like really set me back. And then it's wild to think like, and this is maybe I'll make a little emotional point to some of you, like if you're struggling with something. It's like I was struggling. You know, in 2007 I was completely single. I was, you know, going into this surgery thinking they told me going into the surgery, I know I'm spending forever on this, but they told me going into the surgery like it was basically guaranteed I would lose sight in the left and maybe the right. And I remember coming out of surgery, I had like this weird, like almost out of body experience where I could like feel myself needing to almost throw up, and like I was gonna throw up and I couldn't, but then I felt like I was gonna choke. And I can remember like, sorry, I know it's graphic, but I can remember like telling myself to almost like Zen pause. It was weird. It was like, anyways, anesthetic is a wild drug. And so when I come to, I remember just like opening the eye that they did the surgery on, and I saw the clock on the other end of the room. I saw it clear. I saw it was like 20 after 11 or something. I don't know why that number's in my head, but I saw it, right? And remember they're saying like I was probably gonna see nothing out of that eye. And boom, I saw the clock, and I just closed my eyes, and I was like, okay, I did it. This is okay. Like, this is gonna be okay. So it's like, now it's like 15 years later, I'm married. I got 2 beautiful daughters. You know, I'm working in a job I like. My vision's 20/20 in both eyes. Don't ever give up. You might meet the love of your life a week later, and all of a sudden life's not that bad. All right, my friends, let's go to slide 3. We only got 53. And you know, on that note, it almost gets to this idea of like, why even teach? Like, if it gets to a point where like all teachers do is give PowerPoints and deal with like presenting whatever kind of students approve to be presented to them, and like, it's like I grew up in this like idea of like that school is actually designed to challenge you and to push you and to actually make you a better version of yourself through challenging you to not change your ideas, but test your ideas. And if your ideas stand the test, then they're strengthened. And if not, then it might need to be back to the drawing board. And it's like, I think with these classes, it's like if you don't, and I don't mean this in like a mean way, but if you don't kind of like the personal delivery style, I'm also at the stage of life, and I'd encourage you, like, dive deep into the stuff that you care about and don't really overly care what people say, because some people would rather just have maybe their readings and whatever, but I'm sure other teachers do that. I think the only way I can be successful, or not even successful, but the only way I can have a chance is to just be myself the most I can be myself, and realize that, like, I'm not perfect at nothing, but I care about my students, and I've been digging in this topic for a long time, and I can speak to this idea of things that how like development's a lifelong habit. It's like, man, I thought I was like an adult, and then I had a kid, and I realized, like, man, I was selfish before I had a kid, and selfish in a way that, like, to explain. Sorry, this chair is like super creaky, but selfish in the sense of, like, I just don't want to do that. Like, it's 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning. I don't feel like going to the park. I would rather sleep for 2 more hours, and I want to watch the Raptors game, and I want to watch UFC, and I want to go to see my friend, and I want to do this, and I want to do this, and that's just me being me. And then all of a sudden you have a kid, and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, you're way lower on the priority list. And so, like, that's a major life change. Having a kid's a bigger life change than getting married, in my opinion. And so one of the things we're going to be talking about in this class, especially even in the second half of the class, is that this idea that human development is a lifelong thing. I hope this audio is recording, because I'm like laying my heart out here to you. This is like nothing worse than, like, oh man, when you try to, like, really kind of go deep on something and you realize, like, the recording didn't work, and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can redo that without being super fake. Development's multi-dimensional, and, like, what this means is, and so what I'm going to do with these slides is, what I hope that you'll kind of get the vibe of me is, I'll kind of, like, give the main points on the slide that you'll write down or whatever, and then a lot of my extra talk is to kind of help us understand it and kind of get our head around some of these core ideas. I like multidimensional as a word because, well, a dimension exists, multiple dimensions exist within the same space. It's just you. It's not like there's different parts of you. Different parts is the wrong way of saying it. You're biological, but you're a biological system that has cognition. And you're a biological system that has cognition that lives in a social world. None of those. It's not like there's, like, your biology, and then your emotions, and then your thoughts, and then your memories, and then your social life, and then your thought life, and then your self-talk. It's like, no. It's just, those can be interesting theoretical distinctions that can help us talk about things, but it's just you, and it's just me. And this development is plastic. There's this reason that, so there's this word, and you might have heard of the word neuroplasticity, but people just like this word plasticity. It, like, sounds super smart. Plasticity just means plastic, right? Plasticness. That it has a plasticness to it. But what's plastic? Why is plastic such, like, a world changing? I hear my baby crying. I'm probably gonna do this slide, then take the baby for a walk, and then get back at it to give my wife a bit of a break, because not just development, but life's multidimensional. So anyways, development's plastic, meaning we have this ability to change over time, right? That, like, we're not our patterns. Development's contextualized, right? It's how we move through our life is heavily shaped by the people around us. Contextualized is just another way of saying, like, the environment and the world has a huge influence on us. It involves growth, maintenance, and regulation of loss. So this means, like, growth is kind of the easiest one, right? Like, if you look at, like, the example I always give for the terrible twos, they say terrible twos, but really it's that your lungs and heart almost double in size in the second year of life, right? So it'd be like taking an average university student that's, like, a decent athlete and turning them into, like, a super athlete overnight, and then being surprised if their behavior gets a little bit more rammy and jumpy. So it's about growth. It's also about maintenance and regulating loss, especially when we're talking about later in life. We're talking about things like regulating cognitive loss and Alzheimer's and stuff like that, which we'll talk on more in the second half of the course. Alright, I'm gonna try to get another one in without going upstairs. The baby was crying, but then stopped dead crying. So, like, usually if the baby's crying quite a bit and then it goes dead silent, then I know that my wife's feeding her. That's what that means. So, I have a bit of time here. Okay, I'm just gonna sit. Here's a little lesson for you, because I like recording in PowerPoint because, as you know, I'm not the best at one takes. I sometimes get in my own head when I'm recording. So, like, PowerPoint's awesome though because you can do it slide by slide, and then you just do transitions between your slides, and that actually is a very efficient video transition, especially if you just use like a basic one like fade. And yeah, if you're interested at all, like PowerPoint's absolutely stepping on the toes of like Adobe Premiere Pro. It's actually an incredible video creating program now, right? It's pretty cool. And so, but my little rant started on this point that you have to be careful though, because if you're recording and you press it one too many times, it'll just flip to the next slide, and then you're kind of like, I hope you're done your point from the last slide, right? And it's so you have to be a little bit careful with how the delivery goes, which is why sometimes I'll throw up the whole slide at once. And this is just saying that like within your life, you're being influenced by all these biological processes, right? Like I'm dealing right now. I was just thinking like how much I should keep whining about stuff. And I don't mean to be whining, but I'm just like, okay, here's the thing. I'm the teacher in this course, and I have like 2 kids and my wife, and it's been COVID, all this stuff that you've been all dealing with. It's like I don't have a ton of stories that are like directly related to my family, so I do apologize that I can't be like, well, yeah. So last time I was with my buddies, and it's like my buddies have been playing cards with them online, but actually this summer has been good. I won't lie. I've been like seeing people much more and trying to reestablish that, but this nipsing stuff is important to me too because it's like part of me gets tired down with like Peppa Pig and kid stuff, and being able to talk about stuff like this, even if it's just to my computer. It's not just to my computer though. I know it's not, because that's just being ignorant of how time, space, and time works. Like I know that you're gonna see this soon, and I know that I'm talking to you directly, and I know that my channel, like I know that the students watch the videos, and like speaking to you, you're like, yeah, no kidding, yeah, you're speaking to us. Wow, that's so deep. But no, I just mean, I don't know, there's something. I like actually being a teacher. I think that's it. It's like, and I like having students, and I liked being a student. I like being a student too. It's like at martial arts or whatever, I'm still very much a student. And it's like, I don't view that me being your teacher means I'm better than you. I just mean that it's like, I think it means that like with this specific topic, I've just put in probably more time, right? And that my goal is to help you not get bogged down with some of the stuff and focus on what's actually important, which is that like life is short, and develop meaningful relationships that actually matter, and that where you feel respected, and that's how you sustain through difficult times. And that some of the things we deal with, or the reason I was like, I think I started talking about my kids because I was going to talk about like how I haven't been sleeping well. And it's like, that's like so interesting because it's just really apparent to me right now how much not being properly rested like affects the ability to be high productivity in other areas, especially cognitively, and especially dealing with stress and like resiliency, and with like kid stuff where it's like being a parent rested is much easier than being a parent tired, and any parent will, I think, agree with me with that. You're a social being, but your movie of your life is largely informed by your cognitive processes, right? I often tell my Conestoga students, like, cognitive is just this fancy word that basically means the work your brain does, right? So if you went to University of Waterloo or probably Nipissing, and took a cognitive psychology class. It's going to be about decision making and memory and weighing consequences and all the kind of work that your brain does, all your cognition, all your cognitive processes that shape how you make sense of your world. And then the whole social, emotional, relational component, right? So this idea is that when we talk about how you change through your life, we're largely talking about in these ways, in how your thinking changes, in how your biology, like literally your carbon-based being changes, and then how your social emotional processes change, largely as a reflection of your engagement in the social world. Can you see yourself there? So just because I was talking about her a bit, I thought maybe I'd show you a little Charlotte. Can you say hi? Hi. That was pretty good. Nice. I should just pause it. That's perfect. Okay. Good job doing that on demand. She's getting much more verbal now. And she's like, hi. Hi. She can see herself on the screen, so she can see me too. Hey. Can you say hi, everybody? Have a good class. I hope that your life is good and that you have a happy day. Don't worry about nothing. So we're going to be looking at these 7 defined periods of human development. And she would be in the 2nd and was recently in the 1st and is trying her hardest to get to that 3rd. She's her main word is hi. What do you guys say to the camera? Don't worry, guys, this isn't gonna last too long. Alright. Charlotte, can you say bye? Or just say hi again, because you don't know how to say bye. Can you say hi? Alright, we'll just go with the first one where she did it perfect. Alright, my friends. I must say, I honestly love doing this. When I have the opportunity to, like, have a bit of time when the family's happy, like, it's like, the last few years what's been just tough, it's like, trying to get, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this in your own personalized way of, like, feeling like you are trying to be productive, but also, like, maybe trying to support the people around you, and then there's this, like, pull where it's like, you know that what you're doing with, say, kids or with your parents, helping them with stuff or whatever it is, it's like it's important, but then you're also like, there's the part of your brain that's like, oh, you could have been done chapter 1 presentation by now or whatever, right? So it's like this, because we've all been trained so hard to be productive, especially probably all of you as university students, and I was in that model too, is like being kind of trained in that method. But that whole point was just to say that, like, when we actually get to slow down and talk about this thing, it's like, then I feel blessed. I feel like, and that's kind of life. It's like, that's the yin yang of it. It's like, it feels like a heavy cross and burden, but it's like, that is the blessing. Because that means that you have things that are meaningful. So, okay, Mike, talk about the PowerPoint. The prenatal period is that period, well, before birth, from conception till birth. During this time, there's tremendous growth, right? And this is where such a magical time in terms of brain development. And there's obviously all kinds of complicated issues around this. In this course, we're going to be looking at this topic from almost a strictly, not completely, but almost a strictly biological perspective, because really, if you're talking about developmental psychology and you're interested in the brain, what happens from conception to birth is a huge part of the story. It's like at least half of the story. And it's so mind-blowing, and it's so normal, meaning that, like, it's like you tell people, like, so the female body produces ovaries, and those ovaries can be fertilized by a male sperm, and then what that does is it actually creates this one cell, and that cell has within it this ability to actually duplicate, replicate, and then specialize. Right, but there's two types. There's meiosis and mitosis because sex genes are different and blah blah blah. But without getting too much into next week's chapter, it's like if we just scrap all the words and just say the sperm fertilizes the egg, that thing becomes two things, becomes four things, becomes eight things. Those things are doing their own thing. Eventually it's one of me and one of you. It's so wild. But it's so, and I mean wild, I mean that like in the most appreciative way of saying it. It's like pure nature. So the next stage, once the baby's born, infancy. Okay, so infancy is the first basically 18 or 24 months of life. So from, I should have written that a bit differently, from 0 to basically 1.5 or 2. Kind of depends on, they usually use sort of the, as a kind of milestone marker, kind of starting to walk, starting to talk. So that's why you can see that there's like there's a bit of range there. This greater need of dependence, some of the psychological activities here include things like the development of language, right? So you heard my daughter there with her like ba 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 ba. She's getting real close. She even says hi now. She says, now the only annoying thing is like, that sounds super cute, right? And until she's in the back with my other daughter and she's just saying hi, hi, and my other daughter's like, stop saying hi, 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 stop saying hi. So anyways, she's a one-word machine at this point, but she's starting to get that symbolic thought. It's starting to become much more coordinated in her physicality. So this is typical of the infancy stage. And it's not like you don't already know this. Like this isn't super advanced or whatever, but it's like it's important because this is like kind of establishing the age ranges and what we're going to be focusing on in this course. So we're going to kind of split early childhood and look at that by itself, and then kind of look at middle and later childhood together, just because so much is going on in early childhood up to like 6 or so in terms of this increasing sufficiency, increasing self-care, the whole aspect of school, the whole aspect of peers. So we're going to talk about that. Then we'll talk about how in middle and late childhood, you know, it's again the academic and the school-based stuff. It's at that point the big time emergence of peers as the dominant social influence over family. Not necessarily over family, but like, well, we all know that when we were 12, like how much it was like what our friends thought that was cool that mattered. So then the kind of last, I'm going to show the whole 7 because if you're taking the second part of this course, you'll be taking the last 3, I guess, next term. But this will be kind of the last main topic of this part of the course before Christmas, like, is looking at adolescence then. So this is basically the switch from this learning how to be an adult, right? The switch from childhood to early adulthood, basically 12 to 22, 10 to 22. It depends sort of on whether you're making your distinction cognitively or biologically. At this stage we're seeing, and whether we're talking about boys or girls, we're seeing rapid physical changes to things like height and weight and body shape and sexual organs. And so like some very like biologically significant changes, and that's not even to mention things like hormones. At a behavioral, psychological level, there's this real attempt for identity, right? And we'll talk about that a lot in the teenage chapter or in the adolescence chapter around identity formation. Erickson thought that was the most important aspect of being a teenager. They start to become more logical and abstract, increased ability to think abstractly. And you know, that's not necessarily a good thing, because one of the reasons why there's so much teen anxiety is because teens have the cognitive skill set to picture all kinds of things that could go wrong. More time spent outside the family, this increased risk taking. I'll talk about increased risk taking because that's actually interesting. There's evolutionary reason for that, and it kind of makes sense that if our ancestors grew up, or if our ancestors were in smaller communities, that for the healthiness of the gene pool, there needed to be mixing. So it almost seems like so what about when the kids who are about to become adults are at their almost physical peak, that they have this psychology that makes them more likely to do things like explore new areas and take risks, and that starts to sort of die down in the late 20s. It's like just so interesting, like why that's the case. And I'm telling you right now, it's not random. There's nothing random about that. That evolved that way. That evolved that way because there was reason for that to evolve that way based on our ancestors' lived experience or like daily immersion in their environment that shaped their behavior to such a deep level that it got stamped. So then one of the other things, so in the next part of the course, like in the new year, we're going to finish up the teenage part and talk about the social and emotional aspect of that. And then we're going to move into the early years of adulthood, right? So we're going to look at sort of those late teen years. And again, what I'm going to sort of do is at all the transition points, I'll blur the line a bit because obviously it's not like, this is kind of the big critique of stage models, and this is a stage model, that there's like this stage and then this stage and then this stage, and it's like, well, not everyone fits perfectly, but the response to that is like, yeah, no kidding. It's like, that's not a huge critique. It's like, it's kind of obvious when you're trying to capture all of humankind in a 7-stage model that not everyone's going to fit perfectly, but the idea is that it's actually pretty amazing how much people do fit into that, and that actually there is developmental stages, and actually people do tend to deal with like identity issues in their teens and intimacy issues in their 20s and meaning related issues in their 40s and independence related issues in their early school years. Right? There's in early adulthood, there's this like pressure to establish independence both economically and personally. This to, you know, start a career or find your school that you're going to do and mate. That's not the most compassionate way to say that, but you know what I mean. Start a family. And it's not like you could say that these are societal pressures, but to say that the urge to start a family is only societal pressures is obviously foolish. Are there those society pressures on every other mammal? There's always, and this is where like the nature nurture thing is so interesting, right? Because it's like, it's obviously not nature nurture. It's some complex interaction. Nurture exists within nature, and it's like you're nurturing nature. It's not nurture or nature. Anyways, next slide. And this, I won't make the obvious comment again that it makes me feel old seeing that I'm in the middle adulthood group, but that's okay. Because, and it is okay, and that's almost like a good way to start this slide, is that like as you get into middle adulthood, it's like there is a calm about it. And that'd be one piece of advice I'd give to any of you if you're in your like early 20s or anything and life feels really hectic and chaotic, is although maybe being 40 is not as exciting as being 20, it is calmer. Things do calm down. You get your train on the right track a bit, to use a saying one of my friends always uses. Right, there's this expansion in personal and social involvement and responsibility, trying to help the next generation, whether it's through parenting or coaching or teaching. And then that engagement with the next generation, which Erickson later we'll talk about calls generativity. It's like that's actually really key to positive psychological health as you get older. And then sort of the last slide I'll do here, I might cut my videos different this year. So like if you look at the old site, or not the old site, but I guess just the YouTube channel, some of the first videos I did, like they're all like 3 hours, and because I was just kind of naive, I guess, because when I got hired, they were like, yeah, it's a 3-hour class, and I was like, okay, so I make 3-hour videos. I thought that was just like made sense. But my students over the years have requested slightly shorter videos, so I'm going to try to do that because I know that you have a lot of things on your plate. This one I'm being a bit ranty, but I'll get into my groove. And I might cut these into like parts a bit, just so that, first of all, I'm just kind of anxious to get something to you because I'm kind of late getting stuff out. And so what I'll do is I'll get this piece out, and then later today I'll basically finish the presentation, and I'll get this out too in the next day or two, the full rest of it. This first 40 minutes or so, I think, has been a decent, like, at least trailer to the full presentation, and then I'll do the rest of it. And then later in the week, I'll get out by biological beginnings. And then my goal is that by week 3 we're caught up. And again, I apologize for my kind of slow, delayed start here, but I think we're going to get it all set up. And at least I think you're set up that you don't have any quizzes or anything until, for a few weeks, until we kind of get to chapter 3. So I'll have that on time. We'll make it work. I appreciate that people have been nice. I know that some people are ready to get going, and I actually, honestly, actually like that. I love that. I love that I'm like teaching the students that are like, where's the presentation? We're ready to take notes. It's like, damn, that's a good student. So that just makes me be like, I don't know, try to clear my schedule to record. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut this first piece. I should just do this slide, right? That obviously what I was going to say here is that in late adulthood, people tend to move into a more philosophical state of mind and start to look back over their life in a very different way, right? And start to this life review, and at the same time, there's this like physical degeneration that often happens to the body. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about how we know that like when you're older, what you're going to care about is like the life you lived, and the quality of the life you lived, and the quality of relationships you developed, and if you were a good person to people, and if you feel like you have integrity over the life you lived. And if you don't, if your answer to that is no, then, well, Erickson said that's related to despair. That's going to be what you care about later. You're going to be more philosophical. You're going to be thinking back over your life. And so how do you, as like a 20-year-old or whatever, start to live in a way that later when you look back over it, you'll be filled with integrity and not despair, and that's actually a good life orienting philosophical point. My friends, I hope that wasn't too bad. I'm going to stop here. Part 2 coming soon. All right, love yous, stay well, take care of each other, and call an old friend. Cheers.